Let me starting by read some questions. The first one is no. Okay, you see the appetizer question number 1. Can cybernetics achieve 1% of what computer science has achieved? To the left, you see a cartoon. It's coming from an association of computer science teachers in K-12 schools all over the world. They sort of linked together and sort of coordinating their teaching activity. So when I see that, I was thinking, someday cybernetics can also have so much teachers. They now have 100,000 teachers all over the world. As you can see, in different countries, they put a different number there. So I think to compare it with computer science as a sister field of cybernetics, we really need to do a lot to move towards their direction. So in order to go into that direction, we have this discussion of Bernard's book and maybe a number of other books. Actually, Bernard's book is the second one we discussed. The first one is Lloyd, the other book we did last year. So my intention here is to draw a distinction between textbooks that young kids can use and the essays needed so we need to define our reader group. To my current understanding, Bernard's book is still for our academics, but some of the content, maybe a lot of the content inside, can be used into a future textbook, if you agree. So appetizer question number 2 is, what is the reason that less of our members are interested in this chapter? I was expecting only 3 discussants to be here, and I have this pleasant surprise that we have more people here than I expected. But still, when we discuss who should lead the discussion to each chapter, nobody responded to chapter 6 and chapter 7. So that I said, okay, so that's my job to fill in the blank. Normally, I prefer to perform my facilitator role to have people getting together instead of putting the content myself. But anyway, since I'm here, I would like to share some of my questions with Bernard when I reading chapter 6 word by word. So to roughly answer this question, I would guess that chapter 6 deals with the connection with the philosophy. And also mentioned the relationship with science and with art. So to me, it is still pretty unclear. If we say cybernetics is science, we seems missing a lot of activities that the scientists usually do, namely measurement, collecting data, and putting up a hypothesis and testing, blah blah blah, and we more or less work on the meta level, kind of discussing science version 1, science version 2, first order science, second order science, that sort of thing. So there's I think the relationship, if we want to present this to young kids, say, are you in a science class, or are you in the art class, or are you in a philosophy class? We really need to have something more clear and more specific to bring them to that aha moment. Oh, I get it. So here my comment is, if science without engineering, it will retreat to philosophy, natural philosophy. And art without applicable design, it retreat to daydreaming. And the cybernetics without applicable toolbox, retreat to self-entertainment. So that's my emphasis, that we need toolboxes generated or guided by cybernetic principles to deal with the actual problems we face in the real world. Second question is, because Bernard started by discussing the integration. I have some doubt, because I will ask, does integration really work? Is there a limitation to this, to reverse the main trend in science? We all know that science means categorization and the classification, and so it became more and more narrow, more and more focused to specifics. But cybernetics jumps in and trying to find out isomorphic patterns, isomorphic structures among different fields. That, for the starting point, is a good thing, because I think it benefits our understanding. But how far it can go is my question. What would be the extreme ideal complete integration? Would that become a God perspective, or do we still have some human element in that kind of integration? Third question is, what are some of the reasons that the interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, transdisciplinary voices are louder than the real achievements that won Nobel Prizes? So this question is because we were all enthusiastically to deal with all interdisciplinary study, cross-disciplinary, transdisciplinary, beyond disciplinary. But at the end of the day, what are the real achievements? Of course, we can name some, like like this current AI hype, that's quite interdisciplinary, from a language model, from computer science, from powerful computing capacity, etc. But still, maybe Nobel Prize committees are biased towards the disciplinary work. I don't know. So I threw out these questions here for you guys, and let me finish this, so we can jump into discussion. My guess is it might not be a good fit, this chapter, to be reworked into general theory of learning would be good, because Bernard using one chapter to cover, to draw us a framework of what exactly learning is. But to my hope, it's still not quite clear to the students. So as a new learning theory, built upon Piaget, Boom, Archiris, etc. And perhaps I had contributed a little multi-layer self-organizing theory can also be incorporated in this direction. But certainly it's another academic book instead of going towards the textbook direction. Here, I like the asymmetry Bernard pointed out between the why knowledge and the how knowledge. I think the former more calls for belief, and the latter can be tested in reality, so that it has a stronger survival value. So I would strongly suggest that we focus on the how knowledge, so that goes towards my concept of a toolbox, cybernetics toolbox. And I like this French phrase, even I cannot pronounce it. Bernard can teach us how to read that. But
l'art de sciore l'efficacité de l'action.
Again?
L'art de sciore l'efficacité de l'action.
Okay. It is very close to one of my key focus. I have another tongue twister. I would say a local observer observing a limited, thus incomplete amount of information, reaching to imperfect knowledge of what's and why's, and producing non-optimized plan of hows that sometimes work, but most of the time leading to unintended consequences. I think there is a spirit here, if we could keep working on this direction, that we may really build up some practical epistemology that can be used by the public instead of intimidate them away. I mean, if it's too abstract and too complicated, they will shut off their ears. So generally, it is unclear to me that Bernard quoted a few of cybernetic maxims from Hans von Faust. A is better off when B is better off, things like that. I fear, subjectively, I fear for those maxims are far detached to our current context of our society. I mean, how are we going to use those maxims to face today's issue that we all see? The globalist versus conservative values, the forces aimed at destroying traditional American society, and vaccine mandate and the surveillance that another group with Lucas and Mike, they heavily discuss, Fred, etc. And is this thing called election corruption really exist, or how it comes into being? And the tendency to splitting the United States as a nation. Last week, they had the two national anthems played on the Super Bowl. So how do we use Hans von Faust maxims to think about this situation? I mean, can we make link? I'm having difficulty on that. So in general, my opinion is the pathway from cybernetics to ethics is still not clear. Perhaps Maturana did something promoting love and mutual respect, that sort of thing. But if you are in our group for discussion with Carl Goldberg and Fred Wood, we discussed about the issue of the incompatibility of our religions, the problems happening in Jerusalem, that sort of thing. I feel far detached of these cybernetics slogans towards reality. So that's so my last slide is to I have some suggestions to Bernard. If you are working on the second version, I would recommend more direction, both in the synthesis direction and the application direction. In other words, one way, cybernetics provide a one-angle lens for our cognition, so we see more than the non-cyberneticians. But on the other hand, we should diligently build up our toolbox for the general public, for the young kids, for the college students, so they can use them directly instead of just being fancy about it. They can apply them in their daily work. Structure wise, it's like an X-ray tool. It works good, but on the toolbox side, we in the Science 2.0 layer, you already mentioned the community control and communication and the conversation. I will put consensus building, coordination, the cooperation there, so to make it a 6 key C's. And for the Science 3.0 layer, focus on game theory and evolution, including learning, adaptation, self-organization, and 2 more extended version of self-organization themes might be useful here. Last one is to consider application in the very frontier I call Science 4.0. Science 4.0 deals with a situation that no shared rules are obeyed in terms of unlimited, unrestricted war that is currently happening in our world. So that's about that's all of my questions to Bernard. The goal, the final goal steered towards this textbook thing is that perhaps after some reworking, we can produce student books, videos, website. We can have a teacher's handbook to let them know how to use them in the K-12 schools, and the trainer classes to go with this. We can train a number of teachers to teach the cybernetics course. And perhaps such a course needs to be endorsed by our association, for example, ISC or ISSS, and so that we can promote to the teachers, college professors all over the world. So that's my questions and comments.
Okay, Jason, would you like me to respond?
Yeah, it's your turn to respond, and then we have.
Can we go back? Please go back to your first slide and click through so I can comment them one by one, if that's all right.
Okay.
The first one that you just showed is that one. We'll start there. Now, I counted approximately 42 questions that you presented in your 6 slides, and I don't have time to go address all those in detail. Just to remind everybody that this is one chapter, short chapter in a short book. The book is only 50,000 words, and I'm trying to cover a lot of ground, and I can only do so briefly. I cross-refer to other parts of the book in this chapter, this part, and I give references to it for further reading, so on. So I'm aware it's a rather it's a rather sketchy account in some ways, but I try to make it coherent. First of all, just on this point, a quick response. I see computer science as a subset of cybernetics, historically anyway. And if we begin with education, and I've argued for education as a key factor in helping the world, as it were. I echo H.G. Wells in this when he was calling for a world mind, or world brain. And he talked about a race between education and catastrophe. That was before the Second World War. So we need education of the right kind, where education is about, as I refer to it, as enlightening people, as giving them deep understanding of the human condition. So we already have in the primary school curriculum some coverage of basic maths and biology. And the way I would think about this, and also some reference to society in various forms. These things are fragmented. Now, using the term integration of knowledge is a way of my tipping my hat towards those cyberneticians who emphasize that cybernetics is about being holistic. And here I would include Stafford Beer and Gregory Bateson and certainly Gordon Pask. And possibly Heinz von Förster on that score, but it's about trying to understand the world as a whole, not falling down into specialist channels, but it's a well-rehearsed one that we should not become. We should be generous as well as specialists. I should have this dreadnought. So there are the bits and pieces within the existing curriculum which can be brought together with a holistic view of the world. You know, you could just draw a simple Venn diagram and say, look, all these things are making up knowledge in the world, and we can use cybernetics, or whatever you want to call it, philosophy of science, I would say cybernetics, to help understand how these things work together. So that's a brief response to that. With respect to this idea of, you can go to the next slide now if you like, Jason. I mean, I've got enormous, I mean, I spent most of my career being an educationalist and experimental psychologist looking at human learning, so I could talk forever about these subjects. The integration, there's a brief story to this. There's something called the Encyclopedia of Life Support Systems. It's developed by UNESCO. And it's a massive online compendium of encyclopedias to do with life support systems. I'm going to put the URL in here. Oh no, that's wrong. That's for a guitar. That's got nothing to do with this encyclopedia. Let's get it. There it is. C. Control V. So I've now put it in the chat, and as I'm talking, you might wish to have a quick look at it. It's a massive enterprise with like 600 different encyclopedias, all part of this major project, which was made in the I think in the early 90s. And there was a thread on systems and cybernetics, and however it was edited and the structure was agreed beforehand, there was a coverage of cybernetics. Francisco Paraluna, a well-known social cybernetician, was the overall editor for that section, and he invited me to write a piece on second-order cybernetics for that. At the same time, he invited Ranulph Glanville to write a section on cybernetics and the integration of knowledge. So that title came from them. And then Ranulph, as a close friend of mine, asked me if I would mind swapping because he had his own personal deep interest in second-order cybernetics.
Let's hear from Beifang Zhou from Bangkok. Beifang. Go ahead, please.
好，那我就放录音了。
Okay, go ahead.
Metadisciplinary development and influence of cybernetics. After reading Professor Scott's Cybernetics and Disciplinary Integration, really like this quote from Professor Scott about the introduction to this chapter. Used both reflexively, thinking about one's own thoughts and actions, and pedagogically, helping others think about theirs. Cybernetics has the power to liberate humans from mental chains, conceptual confusion, and harmful practices. Mr. Jason Hu asked me to write a review after reading this chapter, which is a bit difficult to be honest. Why? I personally give two reasons. One, before the concept of meta-discipline is extracted, it is the basic reason for the formation of disciplines. If any discipline cannot go back and forth on the line of knowledge and learning, then the discipline is not established. 2. Professor Scott not only revealed the truth of cybernetics in natural sciences, but also pierced the reality of humanities and social sciences such as art and philosophy. With these two reasons, it is superfluous to talk about the concept of metadiscipline itself. Therefore, if you really want to write your experience, it may only be left to work hard on the future development after the concept of meta-discipline is established. Therefore, in the content of the chapter, Professor Scott's mention of the term theory of everything seems to inspire. Yes, as far as all disciplines in the world are concerned, the content can be different. But the basis of the discipline, from knowledge to learning methods, cannot be inconsistent. Since the methods are consistent and meta-discipline exists as a common concept, isn't there something to write about? How to write it? Is it possible to find a way to popularize cybernetic thought before the teaching of subject majors, so that the concept of meta-discipline will further become popular, common sense of the public? In this way, the integration channel between disciplines has changed from the original recessive existence to explicit cognition. Note again the last sentence of Professor Scott's point in the chapter introduction. Cybernetics has the power to liberate human beings from spiritual chains, conceptual confusion, and harmful practices. Personal cry. If cybernetic thought can start from the common sense of the public, then the starting point for human beings to face the human world in the natural environment will be a qualitative leap. Although the connotation of this quality has yet to be clarified and determined by the academic community, it is achievable to generally improve the public's cognitive level by analogy with current humanistic thinking. At least the dispute between Wittgenstein and Popper on the philosophical problem between the two foreigners will be resolved. Just how big are the gains from resolving the Wittgenstein-Popper debate? Perhaps only thinkers will know, but I just want to say, humanities have reappeared ideals, and human beings have a future. Personally, I think, what can be persistent is that constructivism will transition to new constructivism, using cybernetics as a method, and continuing to serve the ideal of civilization as discerning. As for meta-discipline right-pointing arrow, common sense right-pointing arrow, new constructivism, there is another short article to elaborate, I think. Professor Scott's basic idea of restart philosophy is also here. I wanted to say more, but because my English expression ability is too low, I don't know if what I have said above can convey the meaning, and I hope the seniors can give me more advice.
Wow. Jason, may I respond?
Let me explain a little bit. He's completely functioning in Chinese. So he read Wittgenstein, he read Karl Popper, everything in Chinese. And your book is the first English one, and I forced him to read through AI translation.
Well, that's wonderful. Please communicate to
Yeah, I probably will serve as
Beifang,
interpreter. You
look,
can ask
I
him
think-
questions.
I think his, please tell him, I think his review was very, very generous, very kind, but also it shows B, he has a depth and subtlety of thought, which makes him a good cybernetic thinker. I'm very happy with what he has to say. But one thing I'd like to add to it is this idea of a meta-discipline and sub-disciplines. I've been recently, in the last few months, I've been reading about, I'm not a professional philosopher, but I've been reading a lot about Aristotle, who's sometimes known as the father of cybernetics or the father of biology. And amongst the interesting things that I've come across is his concept of the structure of the disciplines. So he was the first I know, well, there would be something from Plato before that, but mainly it's Aristotle who set out the structure of the disciplines, the differences between the different domains, biology, rhetoric, whatever. He says, and he has an overarching meta-discipline, which he refers to as theology. It's some kind of very high level of, of a kind of metaphysical frame for the whole business of creating knowledge. I'm not saying we should go back to Aristotle, just saying, acknowledging that these debates about the structure of the disciplines and how they emerged one by one from philosophy as specific disciplines like physics, chemistry, and so on, have been going on for a long time, and both in education and in philosophy of science. And I think this is something that I possibly may return to write about. At the moment, I'm thinking of something which is, generally about how Aristotle foresaw, anticipated what we now call cybernetics. But it covers a lot, including this idea of a kind of a disciplinary framework from a metadisciplinary perspective, as well as more specific things about souls and organizations and psyches and so on. Okay, but yes, absolutely fantastic from your colleague. Please thank him on my behalf.
说谢谢你啊，我 I cannot translate the whole what you always said. I just covered that you said thank you to him. 就是说谢谢你了，是表扬了你一大堆。
Tell him I'm looking at Aristotle. Did you say that?
Which one?
Aristotle. Mention to Beifang that I am now studying Aristotle and his comments about metadisciplines. Okay.
他说他正在基于你的建议，他正在学习他正在研究亚里士多德的那个关于 meta discipline 的这个就是就是他在关注这一块了，就是。
So Bernard, you mentioned Aristotle here, and I would inject a short comment or question. Most people start with Aristotle very early in the study of philosophy and work forward through the Middle Ages and the development of, particularly of symbolic logic and the notion of logic in general. You're coming to Aristotle towards the end of your career, which I find rather interesting. And the second part, Jason, the issue of Aristotle within the natural sciences is the issue of causality and the constructive paradoxes that come from the distinction between material causality and efficient causality. And there's a number of philosophers and logicians have written about this distinction between material causality and efficient causality. when Jason uses the words of isomorphism, I think he's building into his view of isomorphism a notion of efficient causality without much weight given to material causality. And the thing about Marcus's comment, which I thought was quite interesting, is that he tried to bridge the distinctions between material and efficient causality through the notion of how he views the action of cybernetics or cyberneticians in the real world and its relationship to mathematics. So this is sort of a question to Marcus then, as well as Bernard, of how do you look at these four views of Aristotelian causality: formal, material, efficient, and final?
May I speak first, Marcus, if you don't mind, because
Okay.
I said I'm not a professional philosopher, but I've been reading philosophy of various kinds on and off all my life. The first philosopher I read in any depth was Friedrich Nietzsche when I was 17, and I just kind of carried on reading pretty randomly, including reading histories of various kinds. So I got a hodgepodge of knowledge, but I took as central in my book, I can't remember which chapter, which part it's in now, the concept of Aristotle's four aetia, the four causes, the necessary, the material, the formal, and the final. And I took from a chap called Erhard von Demarus the idea of four aspects of any occasion of experience of an observer. So as observer, this is now second order cybernetics. As observing systems, we are always have the four facets of our experience will be something material, something necessary, which is things happening and affecting each other, which is like what's his name? The American philosopher, semiotics chap. He has three categories. First, secondness. Charles Saunders Peirce's secondness is the kind of the causality bit, the necessary bit, and then you've got the formal causes, which are the ideas, and then you've got the final, which is purpose. Now, Demarus, apropos of an occasional experience, says this is you've got the he talks about extension in space, which is the stuff, duration in time, that something is happening. So that's the first two categories of experience. The third one he calls form. No, he calls it idea. He uses the word idea. Idea for some kind of form. We have some kind of idea. And the fourth one, which is corresponding to Aristotle's final cause, von Demarus calls it intention. So he has his four. Every moment of experience as an observer, you're experiencing extensions in space, passage or duration in time, idea, some kind of form or structure, and intention, if only your own intention. So those four categories are always present. And I do refer to that somewhere in the book, but I can't remember where. And there's a story to that, is that von Demarus was a German psychiatrist who came to America, and he befriended Warren McCullough. They became friends. Warren McCullough helped von Demarus write his PhD thesis, The Logical Structure of Mind. And in return, von Demarus taught McCullough about German philosophers, including Brentano and people like that. And later on, after von Demarus died, McCullough had his thesis published, and he himself provided a preface, an introduction to that work. And you can see from that how, well, it's like by reverse engineering, you can see how McCullough's thinking was influenced by von Dömer's, and also by reverse engineering, I can see how Pask's thinking in terms of, you know, the biomechanical and the psychosocial were also influenced by von Dömer's. In fact, a certain level in my, after I've been working with Pask for about 4 years, and we had a chap called Dionysius Kallikordas with us, who was also doing his PhD with Pask. Pask, rather kind of like in a special moment, he went to his study and he produced a copy of von Dömer's thesis, The Logical Structure of Mind, with the introduction by Warren McCullough, and allowed us to take copies of it. So he considered us to be mature enough in our thinking to be able to appreciate what was to be found in this work. And I give a that's the background. I mention it briefly in the book, and there is a reference to it in the references. There is the reference, and you can find it online. So if anyone's obviously kind of interested in kind of the foundations of cybernetic thought, that is one of the sources. And if you're interested in philosophy generally, philosophy of mind in particular, that's one of the sources. And it's brilliant. It's beautiful. I love it.
Jerome, you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I wanted to come back to Jason's questions, and this question particularly, why I think it was cybernetics has not succeeded in drawing as many students and teachers as computer science or other disciplines. And I know that Marcus spoke of system dynamics. And so I'll be curious to hear, after reading this chapter of Bernard's book, and others, of course, as well, are on, so to speak, the political economy of cybernetics, and whether certain social or political forces played a role here as well. So I'm thinking of David Noble's work on, you know, the political economy of the United States and its post-war economy, the role of the military in shaping certain sectors in machine goods, in technology, and so on. I'm sure most of you are aware of that history, and just to what extent that may have played a role in foregrounding certain categories of thought and de-emphasizing certain others.
Bernard.
Sorry, was that a question to me?
Yes.
Asking for comment.
Oh dear, I've been looking for, I've just been online looking for this this von Dömer's paper, von
Well, I can repeat
Dömer's.
the question.
Yes, please.
So it concerns the questions that Jason was raising at the beginning in his very first question of why cybernetics has not succeeded in developing handbooks or some kind of more specific curriculum for reaching students and others. And I was curious as to what you might think, Bernard, and what others, of course, you might think about this relative, so to speak, neglect of cybernetics. I think in this chapter, Bernard, you say it ended up being the case that many took, so to speak, from cybernetics and then went back to their disciplines. Why
Yes.
no community remained, so to speak, focused at these boundaries? Is there a sort of a political economy answer there? And I mentioned the work of David Noble and his study of the post-war American economy and the role of the military and so on in shaping it.
No, I don't see the answer there. I see it's just the okay. There's a lovely paper by Pask about the architectural relevance of cybernetics, and this introduced cybernetics to architecture, and it became, and design indirectly, and it became a central part of the architecture curriculum all over the world. very, very influential. And Pascal says, the comment somewhere, the reason this happened is because at the time, architecture wasn't a coherent discipline. It didn't have, a coherent set of methods and concepts. And it incidentally comments that the existing disciplines like biology, physics, chemistry, whatever, had their own existing methods and founding concepts. So they took what they wanted, and psychology at that time as well, they took what they wanted from cybernetics and then sort of forgot the origins. The other thing that was going on with respect to education was that as well as there being a philosophy of science which discusses Aristotle and the structure of the sciences and stuff like that, existing literature, there was an existing literature overlapping literature in education on what should be in the curriculum and how the different subjects relate to each other. So there's already kind of an existing framework where you had, if you have the metadisciplinary aspects of cybernetics were already being covered by courses on philosophy and critical thinking. These things are out there, they're happening up now. Let's teach philosophy to high school kids. Well, I would say, well, let's teach cybernetics and second order cybernetics to high school kids, and within a coherent framework where you can cover the structure of the disciplines and you can address ethics. You can address all this stuff without partitioning it off. So anyway, there's kind of there has been an existing kind of epistemological framework, structure of the disciplines going on in Western thought, in philosophy, science, epistemology, and also in studies of educational curricula. At one point past today, he was a visiting professor at the Open University in the UK for 5 years, and he worked on a project funded by the Ford Foundation called Towards Stronger Methods of Assessment and Curriculum Design. And a team of Americans came over, American academics, came over to review the project. And I was present because I contributed a small part to it. I'd written a paper on concepts as a concept basically. And Pass set out the basic ideas. He was using his ideas of conversation theory and knowledge and task analysis, entailment structures, entailment measures. He set out these ideas about how to represent the structure of knowledge. And the Americans were professors of education, professors of philosophy of science, that kind of person. I could track down their names at some point, but there were, Joseph Schwab was one of them, Joseph Schwab. I'll write his name in a minute, Joseph Schwab. And they said, I remember them saying, they didn't criticize what we were doing, they thought it was marvelous. And Joseph Schwab in particular would say, what you're saying there with respect to different kinds of knowledge is, that's Aristotle such and such. And he quoted the Greek term for different ways of knowing, or different kinds of knowledge that you find in Aristotle. Don't need to go to any detail, but that was I remember that very well because it was a meeting between the existing conceptual framework being used by educationists and philosophers of science with past cybernetic conversation theory and his ideas of the structure of knowledge. And that stuck with me for a long time. But it's an ongoing business. It's still not properly addressed. And I'm hoping that in these really, really, really pressing times where we need to understand how the world works and what it is to be human, there will be, alongside the developments of conversational AI, will be a better understanding of what human beings need to know in our curriculum and how curricula can be structured and presented and effectively instructed as appropriate, or can be used to enlighten people. So there's this kind of ongoing, unfinished business where cybernetics, the great meta-discipline, transdiscipline, all those tools can be brought to bear these really global issues of sharing knowledge. The world brain of H.G. Wells, and it's a game in progress, and it's accelerating, partly because of the drive and the creativity of the engineers, the computing people, but also because we're being driven by the demands of the time, whether it's finding ways to resolve conflicts or finding ways to ameliorate the damage we're doing to the biosphere in all its forms. Okay, thank you. I get preachy sometimes, I can't help it.
More questions? A number of us are still teaching, so maybe those who are teaching cybernetics can share some of the experiences or reflections. No?
Well, somebody respond.
Claudia, you raised your hand.
Yeah, maybe just a short comment. I enjoyed it a lot. And there's a short comment on the, you seem to emphasize need in relation to learning. And I was wondering whether this emphasis is actually, shouldn't it be, I would probably rather emphasize pleasure or desire rather than need in the context of learning. And also it does seem to me that Pask would link this in his when he specifies that the ultimate environment for learning is something that is aesthetically potent. There seems to me something that clearly goes beyond need. So I was just wondering, how would you see that?
I'm happy to comment on that. I'm using need in the sense of evident needs around us. Like we need shelter, we need food and water, and we need to survive. So the needs for learning and knowledge are to do with addressing these problems. We need to solve the problems. If we don't, we're gone. It's just simple law of requisite variety. If we don't acquire the variety to master the variety or control the variety around us, we're gone. But Pask, in his theory of learning, I've always said his theory of learning is the most sophisticated one that we have, beyond Piaget and other people. He early on he wrote a paper called Man as a System That Needs to Learn. And it's kind of generalized from, well, put it another way, before Pask day, psychologists were talking about animals having drives and needs. There's all this theory of reinforcement, so learning theory, so and Pask just came and said, no, we have a need to learn. If we get bored, we go out and look for something to do. We look for variety. We learn, and then if we overdo it, we get tired and fatigued, and then we rest, and then we do it more. So it's an ongoing business of being a self-organizing system of the biological kind. All biological systems, to some extent, do this, but humans do it in the most sophisticated ways because we also have the ability to converse one with another and so on. But yes, and there is this a real pleasure in learning that people either are born with or they discover through the right kind of mentoring or tutoring. So it's all about there's a whole literature now on how to facilitate self-organized learning, helping students become self-organized learners, learning to learn and really empower themselves. And I mentioned somewhere in the introduction to the book when I talk about what the impact of cybernetics on me was. It empowered me to cross disciplines. And up to that point, I'd been sort of narrowly defined by the fact that I was studying psychology as an undergraduate. Then I encountered cybernetics, and suddenly I'm allowed to go and look at these other disciplines, you know, computer science and quantum mechanics, and you know, it was wonderful. It was freeing. But up to that point, you know, my worldview was very narrow and very prescribed about really what was permitted, or what could be done, So yes, it's for some of us, it's a wonderful. Yes, pleasure.
Paul just shared a past paper through chat box. Paul, you want to say something about that?
The link I gave is just the PDF of the paper that Bernard referred to earlier, Architectural Relevance of Cybernetics by Gordon Pascal.
I would point out to you, I waxed lyrical about Erhard von Demerus and Warren McCullough. I put the link there in the chat to that. So anyway, you should be able to find it. And earlier, I put the link to the right at the beginning. I didn't press the send thing, but there it is. To the www.eolss.net. That's the link to the UNESCO Encyclopedia of Life Support Systems, which has entries on cybernetics and system series and all the stuff. But the tragedy about that, and it's been out there now for 20, 30 years nearly, is that you can't get at it unless you're part of some institution that is subscribed. And even as an author, I cannot get in there and do anything. So you can subscribe, but it ought to be free. It's that is a crime. And if I had time, I'd be, maybe I will, maybe I'll write a letter to UNESCO at this late stage in my life, because all that stuff that's in there should be available. And it's worth having a look. It's huge. A virtual dynamic library of about 600 volumes, blah, blah. Thank you, Paul. Good to see you. Have you been resting?
No, I was in, what do you mean, since when? I was in transit a little bit, and that's why I came on the phone. The topic of what happened to cybernetics and why haven't we educated anybody about it is a long and sorry one. I don't want to sit here and cry in my coffee. And there's been some writings about it. If people are curious, we could stick them in the chat. My comment is, what's the response? And if you don't mind a moment of self-serving, I'm trying to do a colloquium in the fall here at Carnegie Mellon, which begins from the organizing principle, which I think is the opposite of what the cybernetic community has largely done and what most communities largely do, which is, to a student, to a PhD, to a postdoc, or to anyone trying to work in the field, you're interested in cybernetics, here's my 2-hour lecture, or here's my 50-page PDF. No, some of you have heard the spiel before, so I apologize for the repeat. So what is it like to start from the point of view, the worldview, the domains, cognitive, the concerns, emotional, interests of such a person who is perhaps new to the world because they're only master's and PhD students, perhaps they're rising faculty, but of any age really, but anyone who is beginning a journey toward, let's say, in general, wicked problems, global or local. So the organizing principle is to ask them or to help them, not in a paternalistic way, but to collaborate with them to express these aspects, their worldview, their domains, their concerns, such that someone or others might look at them and say, oh, well, I know Bernard Scott, he's really fantastic in this. Let's pair the two of you in a conversation, not for mentoring, but for collaboration. And that's the premise of this thing we're going to try to do in the fall. And I've been running a short seminar with 2 PhDs, 2 master's students, and a freshman undergrad, asking them these questions. What's your worldview? What are you concerned about? What domains, et cetera? And we tried concept mapping, and we tried short prose pieces and so on. And we're still collecting an understanding of how that's going, which is so-so. So again, the stories of how cybernetics was absorbed into so many things, but it lost its name, it lost its prefix to cybersecurity and cyberpunk and cyberspace and cyber that. These have been rehashed a few times, I think, in various papers and maybe even in discussions like this one. I'd like to move ahead. I'd like to jump ahead, and I'd like to figure out a way to bring whatever the newest of generations, or to say it better, the newest of times, this era, can benefit from a system cybernetic point of view. So that's the starting point. That's all I have to offer at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul.
Marcus?
Yes, I would like to share one experience. You remember that Raul Espejo, he always said, professors don't become professors because they like to teach, but because they like to learn. And I mean, if I turn that around to the classroom, I will say the students don't have to listen to me, they have to teach me. And so I've had a lot of good experience giving the organizing a whole seminar the way that the students presented something and we discussed it, and this was not a matter that I was too lazy or something. You have, if you are the moderator of that or the professor in the room, you really have to be attentive, and then you have the delicate task of lifting that up to a new level, opening connections and showing fundamental things and so on. So this including, it's a form of inclusiveness, including the students in the process of teaching. This was very fruitful, and I can prove it because I have made an inquiry, what did that help you in your life? Inquiry to people. We have people all around the place who studied here and are working there. And I see that the cybernetic ideas are picked up by people and they use it. Like one guy, for example, who is organizing his bank. He has become the head of a little bank, you know, and he has organized it all the way and it's become very successful. So these thoughts, now the problem is, if I'm from a university where the systems approach is highly valued and all our management teaching and so on is based on some original thoughts of systems theory and cybernetics, but there are a lot of people who adopt that halfway or only rudimentarily. They use 1 or 2 keywords or buzzwords. And so if this guy teaches the student, that student will never learn cybernetics. So a deep teaching is necessary, and that deep teaching can only be realized by an intensive coordination and conversation between teacher and student.
Yes. Well, I quite agree with that, Marcus. We have, since I retired from an academic life in 2010, so I've been sort of independent academic since then, but I've acquired a few, as well as making new acquaintances through online meetings and attending a few conferences when I've been able to, I've acquired, partly thanks to Paul, but thanks to other people I know in the UK, I've acquired 2 or 3, 4 informal students. In most cases, they're already studying a PhD with supervisors, but they've come across cybernetics or they've come across past conversation theory and they want to know more. And someone's put them in touch with me, and suddenly I have these new friends. and I have the great pleasure of, as you say, learning from them as well as sharing with them what I know, what I believe. So yeah, yes, the conversations.
Very interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Peter, you ready to say something?
No, I came in late. Sorry. The time change tripped me up. The discussion of Aristotle was very interesting. Their modes of explanation. I think Aristotle, by far, cybernetics is most influenced by his notions, his explanations in terms of final causes and organizations that allow purposive behavior. And so I read Aristotle primarily as a biologist, a theoretical biologist, rather than a logician or physicist or social theorist. But that's probably all I would have to say. Yeah.
As I mentioned, because it's given me some. I was wondering what to do next, having written my book, and I wrote a little paper about the end of philosophy and the beginning of philosophy, thanks to a renaissance from second order cybernetics or cybernetics in general. And I had to do some, I did some more reading, and I have become fascinated by his works, his overall work, and his work as a person, and obviously what preceded him in the sense of Socrates and Plato. But it's something that maybe I will get around to doing some writing about, because I think it would be illuminating for people who have got some existing knowledge of Aristotle to see the ways in which his ideas can be mapped onto cybernetics. And so these, I'd love at some point to have a discussion around these in a bit more of these ideas in a bit more detail, particularly with someone or some people who are already deeply versed in Aristotle's thought.
I do think that the concept of hylomorphism as a working ontology, organization embedded in matter, is important. And I was going to ask you this last time, but I have my feeling is that reading Pask, that he's thinking in terms of a hylomorphic worldview, that you have individuals, material individuals, and then you have psychological individuals, which are really functional organizations embedded in the material.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, the word Aristotle, as you know, distinguishes the three different kinds of internal organizations: the organizations of living creatures, the plants which reproduce and grow, animals which reproduce and grow and move, and human beings who reproduce and move and grow and also reason. So these are the different, but he calls them different kinds of psyche. And it's from psyche we get psychology and the concept of a soul in Greek. So there's a whole mess of ideas and thinking in there to be disentangled, to get back to Aristotle and what as you say, was this really a view of different kinds of ways in which living systems are organized. It's organization. It's about the organization. It's cybernetic. It's wonderful. That's one of the things I kind of discovered myself in the last few months. So, yeah.
I interject here a question? You've mentioned Aristotle now several times, and you also drew into the conversation or your interpretation of Aristotle the work of Charles Sanders Peirce with regard to secondness. But and I found that to be a very novel interpretation of Charles Saunders Peirce. And so I'm wondering then, it raises the question in my mind of how do you relate the general notions of signaling or semiotics and signs to your views of Aristotle. Semiosis is quite a psychic process.
Yeah, well, I suppose the first thing I'd say is that I use Peirce and Aristotle. They're examples of two different metaphysical schema. These are metaphysical schema. In Peirce, you've got firstness, secondness, and thirdness. And in Aristotle, you've got the four aetia, the four causes. And they're kind of metaphysical in the sense that these are founding categories with which to look at and talk about the world. And first of all, I do a mapping between that and that Peirce's firstness can be interpreted many ways, just the as it is. And in a sense, that there's something there at all is possibly corresponds to the material aspect of the material cause in Aristotle. Secondness in Peirce is the physical world of cause and effect, and that of course does, by that, if you've got to that, you've got the necessary material and necessary causes from Aristotle. And then when you get to Peirce's thirdness, which is interpreted in very, very different ways, but it's decided that as part of the world, you've got order, lawfulness, and that includes human beings being able to reason and human beings finding order and lawfulness in the world. And I see that his thirdness category as corresponding to Aristotle's formal and final causes, particularly as interpreted by von Demeros when he talks about ideas and intentions. So you cannot have a world without ideas and intentions, and you cannot have a world without Peirce's thirdness. So it's a clear way. It's a clear way to understand that the natural sciences just take a subset of the world. They strip out the observer with his ideas and his intentions, his purposes and his orders. It's just the objective stuff that they deal with. But you cannot not have that. You know, it's the great big lesson from cybernetics. You cannot rule out. You cannot give an account of the world without including the observer.
One clarifying question, and then I'll stop. You notice intention here, but it was unclear to me whether intention was to come under the notion of final cause and formal cause, or whether it was in the sense of intensity of material causality.
No, it's intention in the sense of purpose. So final cause. Idea, this is from von Demeros. Von Demeros talks about idea to correspond to formal causes, and he talks about intention, i.e. purpose or intentionality, as it corresponds to final causes. And of course, in Aristotle, the final cause has got different interpretations. I mean, the final cause of my, have I gone? Has my picture gone? No. Oh, this of my coffee mug is put coffee in it. That's its final cause. But there was the creator of this, the designer of this, had his own or her own final cause in mind, the intention. So in von Demeros, his emphasis on that the observer always brings a purpose, intentionality into a worldview. So physicists seeking the obvious example, because von Foerster makes this point several times, the idea that physicists will ever get a theory of everything is like total nonsense, because they're only looking at part of the world, and they're only looking at part of the world in very, very specific kinds of ways. So that they're forever ruled out from knowing the whole. If you want to know the whole or understand the whole, then cybernetics is the place to begin in the full-blooded sense as we've been discussing it today. So and if you want to go into, I remember a long time ago, I wrote an essay, a paper about, I was interested in child development. I was studying child development, and I wrote a paper about moral development, morality and moral development, building on some ideas from cybernetics in it. And I sent a copy to Stafford Beer, and because I'd already appreciated that Stafford was a very wide-thinking person, very wise man. And he sent me a postcard. He said, "Thank you for your poem." This is funny. And he said, "Take your time going down the pathway. Don't hurry down the pathway. Take your time to look at the flowers." And at the bottom, he just wrote "Tat Tuam Asi," which is the Sanskrit for "Thou art that." You are the world. You and the world are one. Tat Tuam Asi. And that was from Stafford. And how old I was about 30 at the time. So there is that aspect of being holistic. And I mean, you get it in systems theory as well, this idea of holism, the whole system. And I did a quick look at the etymology once upon a time. And in English, the roots of whole and holy are the same. And they go back to the old German word for hale and healthy. And I rather like that, that be holistic, look at the world, is to be hale and healthy and whole and holy. And there is, I don't know if anyone ever met Pask or possibly Von Förster, certainly Stafford, in their later years, they were holy men. They had this aura, I mean, very real. They drank and swore and, fornicated, no doubt, if they could. But they had an aura of, the older they got, the wiser they got, and the more holy they got, in the sense of at one with themselves and at one with the world. And I felt that when I was in contact with them. Quite extraordinary, still stays with me. So, yeah. There's a blues song by Sonny Boy Williamson II called "Don't Start Me Talking, I'll Tell You Everything I Know."
Claudia, you mentioned the Bateson in chat box. You say something about that?
Just that there is a discussion by Bateson, a critical discussion of conscious purpose by Bateson in the context of epistemological and cultural premises. And that's quite interesting. I cannot go into depth because I'm not an expert, but what I read, is very, maybe Bernard can speak more to that. But I think it's there is a lot of critical reflection on the idea of intention, and also from first we see that this emphasis on openness to maintain agency for people, new generations, because we cannot know. We should not close the pathway to new ideas.
Thank you, Claudia. That's great, because I've rather overlooked Bateson in what I've been talking about. But with respect to the metaphysics, there's in his Steps Towards an Ecology of Mind, the collection of his papers that everybody should have in their library. There's a paper called Form, Substance and Difference, and that's where he sets out his metaphysical framework, and of course it maps onto the others one way or another, and it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. One of the early papers of his that I read and knocked me off my feet. I thought, wow, fantastic. But yes, he became very concerned. Again, he was one of the great holistic thinkers about human beings and what we were doing to the world. And in 1969 and 70, or 68 and 69, he under the aegis of the Wenner-Gren Foundation, he convened 2 conferences. They were like think tanks with just half a dozen participants, and the theme of them, there were 2 of them, was the effect of conscious purpose on human adaptation, or something like that. But he was addressing that problem, and the first of those conferences, it was attended by his daughter, Mary Catherine, and there is an account of that conference called Our Own Metaphor. Otherwise, nothing of, there were several papers, each of the participants produced a paper for discussion, but they were never published separately as papers. We just have that one account from his daughter, Our Own Metaphor. Great book, everyone should read it, Our Own Metaphor. And the second one was not written up at all, but the papers were produced. And I know about this because at the time Pask was one of the invitees, along with Warren McCullough. Pask prepared 2 very, very interesting papers for them, which I've quoted on occasion, but they weren't published. And also Warren McCullough produced 2 papers, the second of which, called Ragnar Rokkur, which is the Icelandic for End of the World, is his, is close to, it might be his final paper. It's a meditation on the human condition in terms of how we are destroying our world, and it's really poignant. That was published at some point, and it's included in the collected papers of Warren McCullough, which are available online. You can find it. It's the final paper that he wrote, and it's about the end of the world. And it's lovely. I mean, well, lovely. I say lovely, but these are sort of key things that we cyberneticians are enthusiastic about the discipline need to know, or not need to know, but I'm sure we all love to learn about these things. And there's in the book Our Own Metaphor, because this was, I think, the last event that Warren McCullough attended before he died. Someone asked him, I can't remember who it was, but someone says to him, Warren, if there was one thing that you wanted to communicate to your students or your followers, for our students in the future, what would it be? And he said, have more fun. That's Warren. These characters were Bateson and McCullough and Vina, they're all extraordinary past on the first, extraordinary group of people, and they influenced each other, obviously. But so Our Own Metaphor by very, oh good, someone's produced the base and form substance difference. Thank you, Peter. And there's that. And the book you need is Our Own Metaphor. Our Own Metaphor.
Yeah, I suggest everyone save your chat box. It contains a lot of valuable URLs there. We're sharing.
Sorry, don't like typing. Much prefer to dictate. Thanks to AI.
The reference to Mary Catherine Bateson's book is in the chat already. I copied it from my database.
Did you already?
Yeah.
I can't see it. Oh yes, there you are. Sorry. Brilliant. Thank you very much. I've just put it. I've just put it in again. But 1991 is a later edition, because the first edition was around 1970, I believe.
72, actually.
32. Thank you. I love hanging out with scholars. People who attend to details. I love it. Thank you.
Our timing is getting closer to close. So who else has comments and questions? Gerald? You're muted.
Herod, anything to say?
Your microphone. Yeah.
That's it.
I must admit, I'm a little bit outside of the main discussion. What I was wondering about, and maybe it's too little or too much, is this notion of holism. As far as I understand it, the whole is, you know, like when you have a runner in a match, the runner is trying to move forward the body and maybe get the head or the nose first over the line. But will say, of course, I won the race. So the body is not partitioned. And I wonder to what extent you can say that holism is actually not scientific, because in science you always partition, otherwise you won't have variables. So that was the type of background question. I hope you don't mind that it was a little bit outside of the present discussion.
Thank you, Harold. That's lovely. May I comment? Because as you probably know, if you recall that von Bertalanffy, before he came up with general systems thinking, was a biologist, and in the early part of the 20th century, he was part of a group known as who promoted organismic biology. Their argument being that most biologists were spending their time dissecting things, animals and plants, and chopping them up, and they were failing to attend to the whole system, as we would now say, the whole organism. And he was part of, and the organismic movement became strong because when vitalism was rejected, thanks to the discovery of urea, an organic compound which was synthesized in the laboratory. And up to that point, people said there's something special in organisms which makes them alive, this vitalism bit. But that got destroyed. And then organismic biology took over and set out the principles of the need to study the whole system. And then a few years later, von Bertalanffy came up with general systems theory, the idea that this view, that the systemic holistic perspective could be applied all over the place in all other disciplines, which is it's a wonderful story. If we're not familiar with it, it's great. I mean, we in cybernetics tend not to give proper attention and credit to von Bertalanffy, I think. That was, as you say, this question: can it be done scientifically? Well, obviously, we system seekers would assume, yes, this is science. However you define science. Yeah. But thank you for that.
I wrote a paper on von Bertalanffy, maybe interesting.
Yes. Can you, is it available?
Oh, yes, of course. I forget, of course, what I call it, but two systems. So in the title is the word two systems.
Okay.
I can send it or announce it. I always have difficulty finding my own work.
Yes. Well, yes. If you send the details of it or a copy, or a PDF, a copy of it to to Jason.
Yes, I can do that.
That he can distribute to the members, and
Sure.
to the participants. Thank you, Jason.
Okay. Please send everything to me, and I will share everything with you. Thank you so much for today's wonderful discussion. Okay.
Thanks.
Looking
Thank
forward to see you again next month.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye,
白帆，你
everyone.
留一下。
好
Bye, Bernard.
嗯，
Good to see you.
下面我们要好，他们都走了，现在我们可以讲中文了。你今天那个算是第一次露脸啊，评价还是不错的，但是你不能互动，这个是个你的大问题了。他们说什么你也来不及听啊。你那个录音那个文件大不大？如果不大的话，你发给我，我可以那个就做一个事后的发给所有的成员，就说明说是还有这种方式的发言。
有那个文字版在那个邮箱里面。
文字版的在有哦 ，OK， 那就给他们文字版的就行了，是吧？
嗯，
好的。那个那怎么样？泰国的事情，泰国的日子过得怎么样？
泰国目前来说就是生意不好嘛，还是比较平稳了。相对来说，因为那个黄公主被那个打那个莫德纳疫苗。
啊，是，那个事情在泰国闹得很厉害。后来现在什么结论嘛？
没有结论啊，这个肯定他们谈判也是压下来了，肯定不会公开谈，肯定问题是肯定出了，就是说什么皇家他也不想弄出面，因为估计的就是泰国不会配合他了，这个事情一弄出面，原来是配合的嘛，好像是这种欺骗性在那里嘛，搞到现在是可能是不会，不知道皇家那边什么已经是不会配合他们，他们已经想通了。假如说你对老百姓这样，你手下没有百姓的时候，你皇帝你也当不成了，所以这个很简单。
那个公主是死是活啊？现在
应该是就是死掉了来的，什么只是没有讲而已啊，应该是没有讲而已，因为他那个心脏已经不跳了嘛，你还有什么意思啊？你们心脏已经停止跳动了嘛？
那死掉了，他们就罢休了，就这事儿。
罢休嘛，肯定不罢休，可能就是那个公司赔钱啊，辉润公司赔钱啊，就这样啊。
辉瑞
赔说什么？那赔多少年也赔不，他可能也不会要钱，我不知道。这事情很难搞，这个很复杂的事情。那李阳老师，我想跟你说那个卖菜那个事情，我们调查了一下，因为我儿子什么，他也